This is the Art and Business of Writing podcast. Katie Humphrey is an award-winning entrepreneur, professional speaker, and author of Elizabeth, Hazel, and the Day of Desires, a purpose-based fiction book for teens. Her passion these days is the mission she's on to help young people discover the incredible value and worth they have and the impact they could have on the world if they simply believed in themselves. Katie, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, great to have you on. So can you take us a little bit beyond the bio?
Yeah, bios are so funny. We have to use them for professional marketing, but I think that somebody's story is so much more than any accolades or anything in the bio. So, my journey sort of begins about 7 or 8 years ago, and I was diagnosed with a hormonal condition, Chris, that was like being in my mid-20s going through menopause. That's what it felt like. And fast forward, I went on this personal journey where I had healed my body, and that's sort of what got me into that work back in 2009. I ended up writing my first book called Freedom from PCOS, which was the condition that I had, polycystic ovarian syndrome. And after that, became a professional speaker. I started doing some health and lifestyle coaching. And for the past 6 years, really, I've basically been coaching women around the world. I've had a strictly online business. I mean, we had in-person retreats. We did some really fun things. We used to go to Universal Studios for some of my retreats with women, and we'd have women flying from all over the world. But I did a lot of online programs that really taught women specifically how to be healthy in their mind and how that translated into health in their body. It was really amazing. I wrote another book during that time, and I mean, I don't know how else to say this. It just kept evolving. So I learned the marketing piece. I learned how to connect with people. I learned how to write. It was such an amazing experience. And through that journey, I felt a calling to work with teens, not necessarily just females, but all youth. At first, when I felt this way, Chris, I have to be honest, I was like, wait, I don't think I can work with teenagers. Like, I remember being a teenager and I don't think I can work with them. And slowly, I did a lot of volunteer work with teens, and it came to the point where it was just time this year. So last year I wrote a book specifically for young adults, and it's a fiction book, and it got picked up by a publisher. My last 2 books were self-published. And I'm so excited because it really, my business is officially transitioned where I still have, all the people, in my community, we have about 10,000 people, and they love me and I love them. But they really understand that I'm specifically working with young adults now, starting with the book, which is one piece of many puzzles that I'm putting together going forward to really work with our youth. So that's sort of the mission that I'm on right now.
That's excellent. I love how you're, taking your written work and creating a platform with it. I mean, I think that, for someone who has a background like yourself, where you have an entrepreneurial side, it only makes sense to be able to tie in kind of the work you do with a book to show the practical side,
Exactly. And why I love writing so much is I never considered myself a writer before. I'm sure a lot of people who listen to your podcast and follow you, Chris, you're a writer. You consider yourself a writer. You've always been a writer. I've been writing my whole life, but I never identified with it because there are people who are just better writers than me. But I always have really identified with being a marketer. I love being an online marketer. And I know that always gets a bad rap, but when you understand that online marketing is simply just connecting with people who you never meet in person necessarily, and you get to build a relationship and a connection with them, that's what I love so much. So it's really fun for me to actually have this book that I'm proud of to then go take and, like you said, build a platform and connect with teens that way. Because as you know, books can change your life. I mean, we've all read a book that's changed our lives, and that's really what I want to use this book for.
That's great. And I want to get to the whole platform side a little bit further in the conversation. I want to rewind a little bit, and I want to talk about the book some.
Absolutely.
What are some of the things that the book addresses?
Some of the main themes of the book, Chris, are it sort of starts out with this, it's written in first person, and Elizabeth Hazel is our main character. It's Elizabeth Hazel in The Day of Desires, and she's sort of lamenting about her life. And the whole thing is just not even how a teenager may feel, how many of us feel in life when it feels out of control. So, the theme really in the beginning is just this negativity and this toxicity that's in her life because of simply how she thinks about her life and really how she views it. It's really all about her perspective. And as the story shifts, there's just a lot of, connecting messages of friendship and forgiveness and believing in oneself and what really happens when you understand that there's so many opportunities and possibilities in life for you to make it different. And, she goes from sort of being that way to feeling sort of helpless in life to seeing that life can be anything you want it to be. And sometimes we're waiting for our circumstances to change for us to feel better. But it's when we decide to sort of just start believing in ourselves and be proactive about how we feel that our circumstances actually end up changing.
Now, how did you come up with the concept of using a fable to reach teens?
Well, I personally have always loved fiction and fantasy. I'm a huge C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien fan. I studied J.R.R. Tolkien in college. It was actually my second English class. It was a Lord of the Rings class, believe it or not. It was so amazing. And I've always loved fiction and fantasy. And, even when I was coaching and mentoring women the last 6 years, the reason we'd go to Universal Studios is because I would teach through storytelling. I would teach through fiction and fantasy because I believe we learn best through a story. And what are great epic stories about anyway? It's about the hero's journey. It's about what we can experience in everyday life if we really want it to be better, if we really want to pursue our passions, our purpose, what we are calling, what we were put on here on earth to do. So I knew that, Chris, when I was writing a story, number one, I personally did not want to write another self-help book. I just didn't have it in me. I couldn't. So I told one of my mentors, I said, I'm not doing it. I'm going to write another book. It's not going to be self-help. And they said, write what you want to write. So honestly, when I wrote the book, I was never intending it for anybody to read it. I just did the book. And I wrote a story that I really wanted to tell, and it ended up being a fiction fantasy sort of adventure story.
Now, I totally tend to agree with you with regards to the self-help section. It's saturated with a lot of books that pretty much read the same. When you've read one or two or three, you've kind of read a good chunk of them.
Yeah.
So I think, just taking that approach of using fiction and using a fable, something that's very, very popular with teenagers now, is brilliant.
Right. And honestly, Chris, when I was a teenager, I was told I had a reading comprehension problem, that I wasn't a good reader. I couldn't remember what I read. And then I remember picking up the Harry Potter series that came out around the time I was in late high school. And I had no problem reading that book in 2 days. And then I discovered that I actually didn't have a reading comprehension problem. I had a boredom problem. And as a teenager, I'm sure there are teenagers out there who like self-help books. I certainly wasn't one of them. So I think even as adults, we learn best through storytelling, but especially young adults, they're less likely, I always say, to pick up some instructional manual about their life that is going to attempt to possibly say that they understand what a teenager is going through than to read it first person through a teenage character.
Absolutely. I mean, when I think about the books that are on my shelf, a lot of them are written that way. Like the 1 Minute Manager is written that way. The Present is written that way. The Go-Giver is written that way.
Love all those
The
things. Yeah.
Alchemist is written that way. They're all
Oh,
written
The
as
Alchemist. Yes.
yes,
Oh
but they're
my
all
God.
written as these stories, and you can identify with the character. You can see yourself along the journey, and you can kind of pick up the lessons almost second nature, as opposed to having to read and comprehend and underline and write.
Right. And, I love, and I do love self help books. And I think there's a lot of great books out there. But I remember reading The Alchemist and my life changing. I was like, I get it now. Something happens in your brain when somebody explains a concept to you through a really magical story.
Yeah, it was phenomenal. It was recommended to me. Actually, I read it in Fast Company. Pharrell said it was his favorite book, and he said he read it every year. And I was like, I have to download this.
Yes. Yes. It's so amazing.
So yeah, it totally was a game changer. And like I said, The Go-Giver was another one that I just totally adored, and that was something that someone had recommended to me. And I've had a few conversations with Bob Berg on Twitter about the book and how much I love it. And some books just do that to you. That like I said, the whole fable concept really helps you to absorb the information a lot faster, I think.
Yeah, and you get to be part of something. It's not just telling you what to do or telling you what's wrong with your life. You get to actually be part of something. You get to experience something. And it's almost like, even if it's fictional, it's like, if they can do it, I can do it, because you identify so much with the character. And that was a big inspiration for me. Honestly, when I wrote the book, we didn't know it was going to be for young adults until I talked to my publishers. We were really like, this is probably best for young adults. Although, It's available for pre-order right now, and we've had so many adults already purchase it. Not that why wouldn't an adult purchase it, but still, it's just so funny to me because I keep hearing from, I'm the same way too. I keep hearing from all sorts of adults saying, "Oh my gosh, I've been looking for a new series to get started in. I've been looking for a book like this." So it's just so fun, Chris, that at any age we can appreciate a good story. And hey, if there's a message with it too, a purpose-based message, even better.
No, I totally agree. And now, how did you come up with the character Elizabeth Hazel, and how is she like the girls you're trying to reach?
You know, I honestly I don't know if any other writers can relate to this, but I don't necessarily know. I just knew that her life, to be very blunt about it, really sucked, and I it just sucks the way that it is when you in the opening part of the story. And as far as her appearance, she always talks about her body weight. She's gained 60 pounds in the last 3 years. She's about to turn 18. She's about to be a senior in high school, and she's talking about how much weight she's gained and how her hair's out of control and all these things. She complains about everything, and I didn't have anybody particularly in mind when I sort of created her, but I've been working with so many girls over the years. I mean, it just felt like I'm tired. Not that I don't love characters who are glamorous and beautiful and have it all together, but we can't all relate to that character. And it was really important to me to write a character who was imperfect in every way and it beautiful in those imperfections. It's like, and even though our society tells us, let's specifically talk about the weight issue, our society tells us that you can lose weight and you'll be prettier. I worked with women for the last 6 years, and I told them, I'm like, you shouldn't. Losing weight is great because yay, be healthy, we want you to feel comfortable where you're at, but in no way, shape, or form should you ever think that you're not beautiful because you have weight to lose. Like that's what society is telling you, and that's a lie. It's not true, and you could lose all the weight in the world and you won't necessarily feel more beautiful. So what's interesting is the character, we're talking about it being a trilogy. The character will never lose weight. I don't want her to. She's perfect as she is. Now, she does have some unhealthy habits, such as smoking, that she sort of gives up. But other than that, the point is not for her to improve in her appearance towards the end. That was one of the most significant parts about her.
Ooh, very cool. So you mentioned, kind of having it be a trilogy.
Yeah. The book, my publishers will tell you that the book is a self-contained book. So if I never wrote another one, it sort of, there are pieces that you're like, wait a minute, what happens next? So we sort of did that so that we could write a second and third installment. But the book in and of itself, you will feel that you get some closure in some things. As a marketer, you always open up loops, and I tend to never close them. But in
That
this
is
one,
so true.
yeah. So I'm just like, that's so copywriting. You were opening up like all these loops, and my husband kept saying, "Well, what happens here?" I'm like, "Well, you're just gonna have to hope that I write another book."
Oh, that's great. No, but I like how you mentioned that, you kept the character, I guess, true to herself. You weren't trying to make her into the image of this kind of modern woman that advertising and everybody tries to market to. Like, you just left her as her normal self, and I really
Like,
admire that.
well, like a Disney character girl, and I don't mean like the cartoons. I mean even on the Disney Channel, there are these cute young girls that doesn't necessarily represent the average teenage girl, and even the other characters in the book. It's so interesting. Whenever you come up with characters, some of them showed up. I didn't plan on some of them being there until I started writing the story. But what's interesting about Elizabeth is that she is so different by the end of the book, but not physically different. She blossoms, she evolves, she transforms, she transcends this mediocre way of thinking and believing about herself. Yet she feels so amazing and just can't believe that gets to be her life and who she is. But nothing has actually physically changed about her.
Ooh, this is exciting. So exciting. Now, you classify the book genre as purpose-based.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something you came up with? Because I really like it a lot, actually. And what does it
Yeah.
mean?
So, I mean, technically it's fiction, young adult fiction, but we keep talking about it being purpose-based because when you say fable, a writer understands what a fable means. The general public may not know what that means. If you say, well, this book is a fable, they'll say, okay, but what is that really? Fiction, everybody can understand. So when I say purpose-based fiction, it's like, hey, your kid is going to read this or you're going to read this and you're going to get something out of it. So don't tell your kid they're going to get something out of it. Tell them it's an exciting story. But purpose-based is I didn't just write the story to tell a good story. I wrote it specifically because of the message.
Now, something I noticed on your website, I believe your website and on your Facebook page, is that you have New York Times bestselling author Larry Wignet,
Yeah,
who
Larry Wing.
endorsed your book. How did he do that? Like, do you know him? Like, how did that happen?
I met Larry in a program. I met Larry. I worked with a business mentor, Suzanne Evans, and Suzanne and Larry worked together on a lot of different things. And he was my mentor going through the program where I actually wrote the book. And if anybody knows anything about Larry, Larry is, and he doesn't mind me saying this, is never just going to compliment you. That's not how he is. Larry tells it like it is to the point where he frightens people. And whatever reason, maybe it's my dad's personality, Larry doesn't frighten me. I absolutely adore him. And I said, Larry, please read my book. Please, please, please. And, he didn't want to. And I was like, Larry, read my book. And he said, fine, I have an hour. I'll read your book. That's it. He read the book and he gave me that quote. He was like, you have to do something with this. And again, Larry saying something like that, I mean, it's the best compliment you could ever get in the world.
So, for other writers who may want to get endorsements,
Mm-hmm.
such as that, is it effective to approach someone like, provided either you have a warm relationship or you know someone who can help you get that? Is it a great strategy?
Yeah, here's what I think about endorsements because I won't mention the other person who we're looking to get an endorsement from, somebody else we're looking to get a review from, but it's a friend of a family friend. And she's not going to do it without reading the book, of course. So it wouldn't be like some illegitimate review. But I always say you probably know somebody who knows somebody or know somebody who knows, you're probably 1 or 2 degrees away from somebody who'd be really worth your while to say, hey, would you mind asking this person to review my book? I don't mind asking people for favors at all, and especially with your book, there are a lot, we have this specific strategy about reaching out to people with I like to handwrite notes and personally mail certain people who've inspired me. Paulo Coelho, they're just people like who wrote The Alchemist. There are people
Yes.
out there who you may want to endorse your book. It never hurts to send a package to them or to their publicist with a handwritten note. You can get in anybody's information these days. So I say, really, honestly, Chris, when it came down to the grassroots part, not just going through my publicist about who to review the book, because they're taking care of that. When I knew about Larry and several others who I really want endorsements and reviews, this is going to sound silly. I meditated on it. I would meditate on it and I would sit there and go, what feels really what am I resonating with, not what feels contrived and what feels forced and what am I trying to push and get something out of it from them, but what feels really good, and I thought I could write thank you notes to people who've inspired me and include my book, and you never know, if they like it, they may give me a review. So I say when it comes to getting reviews, don't be afraid to ask people. If you've got their email or you can guess their email or you've got their address, mail them a copy of your book. My very first book, Freedom from PCOS, I asked JJ Virgin. She is the best-selling author of multiple books like The Virgin Diet. I mean, she's been on everything. When I emailed her, she had just written, I think, 6 Weeks to Sleek and Sexy Arms, something like that. It was a bestseller. New York Times bestseller. And I basically had her email from a mentor of mine. I said, can I have JJ's email? And I said, JJ, you don't know me, but I think it's great what you do. And I did. I loved her work. And I said, this is who I am and what I do. And would you please write the foreword to my book? And she did. And she basically said, she just said, hey, I don't have a lot of time. Could you send me a template? Sent her one right away. She sent it back. She did the foreword to my first book. It's like, I think most people, Chris, are just afraid to ask people. So it's not about who's the most famous person out there, but who's somebody I'm either connected with or I feel that I resonate with, and just have some guts and just ask them.
Dude, that's awesome. It's funny, the other day on Instagram, I posted an image that I'd created, and it said you have to ASK to GET.
If you don't ask, you don't get. And what's the worst that they're going to say? No, you suck. So what? And by the way, nobody ever says that. They just ignore you.
Right.
They're not going to take the time to say you suck. They just will say nothing and you move on. So, the thing is Larry could have said no. And by the way, even though he said that about my book, I still had to ask about a month ago and say, hey, Larry, do you mind if I use this quote? And I said, this is exactly how it will appear. And part of me was like, Larry's the kind of person who'll be like, no, no, you cannot use that. I mean, he has no problem saying no to you. And he wrote back, he said, you can absolutely use it. But the thing is, Chris, most people are you can't be afraid to ask. Like, you just have to be gutsy and be bold
I agree. I mean,
and not pushy.
no is not a bad word, and you have to get through a bunch of no's to get to your yes. So I definitely applaud you for just doing that. I think that's and I think it's great advice that you've kind of shared with our listeners just to go for it.
Oh, yeah. And don't take it personally if somebody doesn't like you or like your work, because even if they don't like you, it's not even about you. That's about them. And quite frankly, as long as you're just kind and you're passionate about what you're doing and you're not acting desperate and you're not acting pushy, you should have no problem getting the endorsements and reviews that you need.
Awesome, awesome advice. Now, can I tell you my Larry story?
Yes. Please, please.
So when my son Hayden, who's now 3, was a little tot baby, he had colic and he would just cry for what seemed like hours on end. So one day, he was laying on the bed crying, and I pulled out my copy of Shut Up, Stop Whining, and Get a Life, and I laid it right across his chest and took a picture of it.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I posted it on Facebook, and it got like so many likes and just comments, just because people thought the irony of it was so good.
And seriously, if Larry saw that, he would die laughing. He thinks that kind of stuff very humorous.
I'll have to send it to him.
Oh, yeah. Post it on his fan page. He would love that.
Oh, definitely.
And he responds to everybody. That's the thing. We often think that people aren't accessible, and they're very accessible.
Oh no, I definitely agree. I've made so many connections just through Twitter alone, because so many people manage their own Twitter presence.
Oh, yeah.
So
I mean, sometimes we're thinking that who we're trying to reach out to is I can't even believe I can't remember the Hunger Games girl, Jennifer Lawrence. We think we're reaching out to like an A-list. These are people who are on social media because they want to be, because they want to hear from their fans. They want to hear from readers, So whomever it is that you need to get in touch with, they're so accessible.
Oh, totally. Now, let's talk about like beta readers and focus groups, because I'm assuming that with a book like this, you probably had to sit down with some teen girls and have them weigh in on the story and the relevance and kind of work out and need some of the details to help you out, right?
Some of it I did.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I have a focus group that we do for marketing and everything else.
Okay.
Yeah, some of the details we did, but I've done the work long enough that I was pretty confident in what I was doing. So I didn't have, there were some things that I would ask my niece, who was 15 at the time,
Yeah.
and some other girls. But yeah, in general, I kind of went with my gut on most things.
All right, that sounds good too.
Well,
Well, the thing is, when you've been a person in the industry like you have, I guess it seems to be, that you would know what to do in that regard.
Well, and there are some parts where forgiveness comes into play.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that some of the girls I've worked with, if I said, how do you feel about her forgiving this person? They may not be okay with it, where it was important for me to make sure that she forgave that person or that situation. So I believe in focus groups. I believe in feedback to a certain point and with certain things. There's just some things that you're just going to have to trust yourself on, because you may get feedback that's it's relative. Just because some teens are saying, well, I don't know about that, doesn't mean that teens as a whole wouldn't enjoy the story.
Right. Now, I guess with that, like, what sort of, like, how do you weigh the not the criticism, but I guess, how do you weigh the feedback when you, like, send your stuff to a beta reader or a focus group? How do you kind of decide, okay, well, this is relevant, I'll keep that. This really isn't so much, I'm going to go ahead and scrap that.
I mean, it's really about the source.
Okay.
When I first did the book, having Larry read it was really important for me, because he isn't just a great writer. I love his self-help books, but he knows what actually sells. That's the cool thing about Larry, is that he has New York Times bestsellers because of his platform. He didn't finagle the system to get any of his 6 books on the New York Times bestseller or the Wall Street Journal. So mine was, I will not ask just anybody. And I have had some people read the book, even especially before it was edited, who I didn't ask them to read the book. And I could kind of tell that they didn't really get it. And I didn't even ask them what they thought, Chris, because I didn't care. So my focus group, they knew the story, they've read the book, And I said, here's what it's about. And when I heard them screaming and getting excited, I knew I was on the right track. So it's almost like you have to just be really careful of the source. And I don't believe in asking people about everything because that's about you not trusting yourself. If I asked, if I asked people who I trust the most in my life, even my family, about even getting published after they read the unedited book, probably many of them would have said, you're probably never going to get published. Like, right? So I would just be very careful who you're getting feedback from, who's reading your work. I know a lot of people do that kind of stuff. I just don't. I'm really, really careful because once something's in my head, then I've decided that it's not possible. So I really try to, just make sure it's my group of girls that I'm talking to and some of the boys, in our group here at our youth group. And other than that, it has to be somebody who I implicitly trust, who understands what I'm trying to do here, who actually has some type of experience with this. Otherwise, I don't really take anybody's feedback into consideration.
I love that. Just the whole, trusting yourself. Because I think as a writer, that whole concept of am I good? Is this going to sell? Will people like it? Just it always floods your mind. So just knowing that you got to that point where you can trust yourself is critical.
Well, and you know what? I like the story. I like the characters. I like the book. It changed me. So if everybody hated it, oh well, like that's their problem. And
Yes.
honestly, Chris, every day I know exactly what you're talking about. It still goes through my mind. Some people are going to hate it. Some people are going to think I'm a terrible writer. Some people are going to, right? And I don't even think about that. I more or less focus on what am I doing here? Is this about me and my ego? There's always going to be somebody who's a better writer, somebody who's better everything. My only mission is to get it into the hands of as many young adults as possible. And I'll do whatever I have to do that. So I'm not even going to sit here and say I'm the best writer. It's going to be the best book you're ever going to read. I honestly don't care about that. I only care about young people reading it and it being one little piece of what I'm trying to create to help improve their lives.
Oh, that's awesome. And I think that's, it's important that you've kind of framed your purpose around that, that you've kind of settled in on it's not about me, but it's about the purpose of the book and who the book is going to serve and the lives that it's going to change.
Well, and I think every author can do that, fiction or nonfiction. You have to get really real with yourself and say, is this really about me and how good this is going to make me feel? Or even if your book isn't purpose based, it's just a cool story. Or if it is nonfiction and it's about the history of Alabama, I don't know. Whatever it is, it's obviously important for you to share it. And whatever that importance is, whatever your deep driving why is, it's so important for you to share this book, self published or traditionally published. Don't let anybody stop you. Don't let anybody make you feel badly about what kind of a writer you are. Forget about them. But the more that your ego is attached to getting approval from others through your work, oh my gosh, you'll stop the first time somebody gives you a negative review.
That is true. That is true. Yeah. I was talking a few episodes back to a writer and she was talking about how, she was getting reviews. She's a young adult writer. And she's like, all these 50-year-old men were writing these reviews. And it's like, why do I care what 50-year-old men think about young adult fiction,
And why are they even writing the review? That's
Exactly, but it's one of
what
those things where, she was saying, hey, they always tell you just don't worry about the reviews, don't look at the reviews. They're not relevant in a lot of ways. It's just about, what you do with your book. So,
yeah. And don't read the bad reviews if you can help it. Just
right.
forget about it. Forget about it.
Now, on the business side, you had mentioned, before that you'd self-published your first two, and now you've gone with publishing.
Yes.
How did that come about?
So honestly, I think self-publishing is the greatest thing in the world. Why not? Larry Winget, going back to Larry, he sold an incredible amount of books. I want to say 100,000 books a year of his different books when he was self-published. And the only reason he decided to go with a traditional publisher is because he wanted to see his book in bookstores. That's the only difference. So, I had never really thought about being traditionally published. Until when this book came along, something in me was like, it needs to be in bookstores. It needs to be in schools. It needs to be on traditional media. And it's much harder to do that sometimes with a self-published book unless you've had a lot of traction with it. So, oh my gosh, my story is going to sound so wild. I mean, this has always been my experience. When I knew I wanted to go with a publisher, I tried going through a couple literary agents. One was like, I don't do fiction, and one was like, I hate your story, basically. And I was like, and that kind of stuff won't bother me because I'm like, well, they don't know what they're talking about. So I sat there one day, I was like taking a hot shower or something, and I thought, what am I doing wrong? This feels very forced. Whenever things feel forced, Chris, I've been marketing long enough. The stuff you're trying to force that feels very just like frustrating is never going to work. The stuff that just feels good, feels natural, it resonates with you, always works. I don't know how or why, but it does. And something occurred to me. And the thought that occurred to me was, they will come to you. And I thought, I'm slowly going insane. How is a publisher going to come to me? Like, who am I? And anyhow, a few days later, a friend of mine, Donna, said, Katie, I know you've been looking to get published. You're looking for a publisher. I just want to introduce you to some friends of mine. They'll give you some advice. And so they did her a favor. They got on Skype with me. They ran Aperture Press up in Pennsylvania. And we got to having a conversation, and I was there to really just ask them some questions. Well, they heard all about my story, how passionate I was about the book, how I know how to market and get in front of people. And I was so committed to doing this with this book that they looked at each other and they said, we have our whole slot full for the books we're publishing in 2015, but we want to add yours. I thought, what? How can this be? I mean, that is not why they came on this conversation. And it was so serendipitous. And I just couldn't believe it. They said, but first we'll need to read your 50-page sample and then we'll let you know. So I remember calling my mother and being like, well, now we really know if I don't get published, it's because my story sucks. So it was all writing on this, the 50-page sample. So I feel like it took them like a month to tell me yes or no. So I remember the longest month of my life. And the minute that they told me yes, I remember writing Larry and being like, it's going to be published. I mean, can you believe this? Now, here's the interesting thing. If you are being published or you want to be published or you have been, then you will agree with me. That was last year. I'm used to self-publishing and getting that baby done and out there and let's do this. It took a year and I'm not a patient person. So I just got my copy in yesterday actually and felt the book for the first time and held it in my hands. So it's been quite a long process, but publishers aren't going to come to all of us. It just seemed to happen that way. I would have done anything to get published. I just still think it's really a good idea if you think meditation's weird, then just take a step back, do some thinking time, maybe have a cup of coffee and a journal, do some thinking time, and really start asking some questions. What is the best and most effortless way for me to get published? For me, and it's amazing that you'll end up meeting somebody who knows somebody, or you'll think of a literary agent that you'll read about in the newspaper and you'll say, oh, that's the person I can get in touch with. I think so often, Chris, we don't know what to do and we get overwhelmed because we're trying to go about it in a very logical way instead of really taking a step back and saying, okay, what makes the most sense for me right now? What can I do in this situation?
Oh no, and I totally agree. No, meditation is not weird. Well, it's funny because I think a lot of what we do anyway is very meditative. We just don't call it that.
Yes.
It's very, very meditative. Whether you're taking a walk and pondering whatever it is you're thinking about, that's still a meditative process.
Oh, it so is. You get the best ideas when you're
You
walking.
do. I
Yes.
walk so many times a day, and my wife's like, "What are you doing? You on another walk?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's how I get ideas. I walk. I just walk and meditate, walk and think, and it all just kind
Oh
of
my
comes together from the
gosh.
walks."
Yes. Oh my gosh. Walks are the best. And honestly, if you're getting stuck even with your writing or with thinking about how am I going to get published or how am I going to market this book, all of my ideas for marketing, I have it on my wall in the shape of a clock. We have this whole marketing plan and everything. The whole marketing plan literally came piece by piece from going on walks, thinking in the shower, sitting down quietly with a cup of coffee in the morning. Those are where my best ideas came from. They did not come from staring at my computer and typing out my plan. It came in that meditative place. Writing is creative, so is marketing. You will get all of your best ideas and the things that will actually work when you're in that creative meditative place.
Oh yeah, I totally subscribe to that. I get most of my ideas in the quote unquote non-creative space, whether I'm washing my car. So I have to be doing something other than writing, and all of a sudden, here they come. I'm outside, cleaning something, here comes an idea. Or, I'm standing in the shower, here comes an idea. Or I'm
That's right.
washing dishes, here comes an idea.
Yeah, it's so true. It's amazing.
So I'm totally on board with that. But I love that idea just of what you said when it feels forced, you shouldn't do it.
No,
You
dude, don't
know, but
ever
just
feel
kind of
don't.
going with things as they feel natural and comfortable to you. And I'm totally also just a big proponent of mental theater. So I don't think you're crazy. I have no problem talking to myself about things and having those conversations in my head till I figure things out.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
it's just the way that the mind has to work itself out. You know, your brain just does that. It's
Well,
hard to even explain how it all works, but it does work.
you're just accessing your genius. And a lot of people do it through narcotics or substance, and I just don't have that luxury. I have to do it through the natural method. So
Yeah, exactly.
the same place that you're accessing that genius of writing and expressing your art, that is the same place that all of these answers come to you on how to get published, on how to market, on how to get this in front of your book into as many, hands of as many readers as possible.
Oh, totally. I was reflecting today even about. I listened to this Anthony Robbins CD years ago called The Power of Focus, and he talked about just asking yourself different questions and using your mind like a computer. Because when you tell your mind one thing, it goes and finds that answer for you.
It does. And I love Tony Robbins.
I know he's
Yes.
just the stuff that he comes up with, and you're like, and it just works. And I know, yeah, I could go on and on about how much I love Tony Robbins and how much he changed my life because he has. I mean, in a lot of ways, I wouldn't be here now if it wasn't for that one CD that I listened to.
Right? Was that personal power?
And it was
Or
power. It was power of focus. I mean, because I'd read, Awaken the Giant Within with my mastermind group a number of years ago, and I learned a lot from that. But it was just that one CD, The Power of Focus,
oh yeah.
and he talked about testing the power of something.
It's amazing.
And I was like, I'm
Right?
going to test the power of something too. So I decided, okay, I'm going to test the power of if I write every day, I want to see what happens. I want to see where that goes. And that writing every day took me from, from not being a writer to writing full time quickly.
That's amazing. Well, you know what's funny? Speaking of writing, writing this book was interesting for me because I hated writing before this book. I'm really great at copywriting. I don't necessarily love it, but I could do it within 5 minutes. I can just write copy like no other. Right, my publicist writing the press release and me making some changes was the longest, most painful process ever because I don't necessarily write like that. Writing fiction was so natural and easy for me. I honestly, it was the most fun I've ever had. And that's probably why I never identified with being a writer. It's so interesting when you're doing something that is just, it's just not in the right, you're not doing it in the right frame. You're not doing it in the right way. Once I started writing fiction, I was like, I could write the rest of my life, TV shows, movies, books, like anything that has to do with a great story. I just can't write self-help.
Now, I want to rewind just a little bit back to the publishing side.
Hmm.
Can you go over the steps of where you started from from the after the conversation with the publisher and you gave them the story and they approved to going to the very end where the book is actually in your hand? Like, what were the steps you had to go through?
Oh my God. Well, first, I had to basically submit the rest of the manuscript. So the story was finished, but it needed to be cleaned up. So a lot of people, you have to have at least a 50-page sample a lot of times, but you don't necessarily need to send it to somebody unless they ask for it. I believe you do, your synopsis and query letter. So the story was finished, but I paid to have it edited from two different people and cleaned up. And then I went back through it, sent it into them. And once they had it, that's when the editing process started. Now, for me personally, it's very hard for me not to take things personally. So all those things I said earlier about not taking them personally, I mean it. I am not somebody made of stone. It hurts my feelings when somebody says something mean in the editing process. And I told my publishers, I said the editors it was such an easy, fun process. I couldn't believe it because they gave, notes on a lot of different things because she actually travels to another world called Elon. And while this is a made up world, it very much resembles, 13th, 14th century, medieval times, England. So I had to do a lot of research for that part. And it was hilarious because even my publisher, he actually is a history buff. So there were things that he would say that we would not argue or anything, but he would say, okay, well, she's wearing armor at this part. Armor was very heavy and very expensive. And he was trying to rationalize. I'm like, there's a dragon. I don't care if she's wearing armor and it doesn't make sense. So, we went through the whole editing process. And then I actually had the book illustrated in the beginning of each chapter. So had the illustrations done. Once it was edited and all cleaned up, that's when they started putting together the cover, and they wanted to do that. So that was a really fun process. Got to choose the book cover, and then after that, I simply I don't know about other fiction books, but they don't always necessarily do an introduction or an acknowledgement. You won't see that in all fiction books, but I certainly wanted it. I believe John Gordon's Energy Bus and maybe The Go Giver, they do things like that because it is a fable. So then I had to turn in my about the author, introduction, acknowledgement, dedication. And I mean, I can't even believe I just said the entire process because it seemed like it was a lot more and it took forever. But that's basically all it was. You know, it was a lot of waiting, a lot of going back and forth. But rereading my own story and re-editing it was probably the most painful part because once I've read a story, I don't really want to read it again for a long time. So having to read my own story, it's like after a while, parts that you thought were so good, you're like, oh my gosh, if I have to read that part one more time, I don't know. So to the very end, then it was really the whole time, by the way, this is really important. The whole time while we were getting the book done, I was developing a marketing plan. I was getting my platform ready. I was working with a publicity team that we weren't going to start until the summer, but I already knew what we needed to line up. So meanwhile, while my publishers are doing the book piece, I'm working on the marketing piece because I needed to be able to move forward as soon as they were done. So we actually have a grassroots marketing plan that we've already started working on, and we have a traditional TV, radio, newspaper, that kind of thing. We have a traditional media plan as well. So I was working on both of those and running my business. I didn't really make the transition from my business that I've had for 6 years until June. So, I was doing sort of all of these things at once, but it was one little step at a time. It was never overwhelming. In fact, I hit my deadlines much quicker than I think they were used to. I think a lot of writers don't hit their deadlines or something, but I would be done. And then I thought that they would get it right back to me. That's just not how it works. So it was fairly simple. They do a lot of the editing. You just have to make sure your book is cleaned up. And as far as the cover and getting it all, until it's done, I mean, it's great. You just have to be able to write the synopsis and what I call the log line, the one sentence, what your book is about. You just need to be able to produce that whenever they ask.
Now, you said that your book was illustrated partially, right? Um,
Yeah.
Now, do you choose the illustrator or does the publisher choose? Like, how much control do you have over your book when you're working with a publisher?
So it varies. You have to read your contract, but it varies from publisher to publisher. My publisher flat out just said, if you want to hire an illustrator, you contract them. Some publishing houses will say, no, if you're going to have it illustrated, you need to go through us. But they let me, I actually contracted my sister. I had somebody at first and they couldn't do it. And I remember being like, oh my gosh, I know that I want this book illustrated. This is important to me. And I woke up from a nap or one morning with the craziest idea in my head. It was like, why don't you ask your sister? She's been an artist how long? Why haven't you ever thought about asking her? She did a phenomenal job. I mean, it's amazing.
I love how your ideas come about.
Right. And just, 99% of the time I'm trying to force them. So it's kind of a little ironic that I get them when I'm not trying to.
Yeah. Now, I really like that you said that you kept moving through the process. Like when the publisher was working on it, you kept moving with your marketing, you kept working on your publicity. Like, how important is it for you or even for any writer to kind of stay ahead of the curve?
Oh my gosh, for me, so important because I'm a sprinter. So I like to take breaks and then I like to hit the ground running. And I can't hit the ground running if I don't know what I'm doing. So I developed my plan. I mean, I turned in my marketing plan to them and they didn't even ask for it in the beginning of the year. I said, this is what I'm going to do. You should know. Like, here's what we're working on. And then my publicist over the summer and I went back and forth with my publisher back and forth. She had questions and then my publisher would say, here's your answers. And I didn't want them to do any overlap. The marketing and publicity part is the most important part. It's way more important than your actual book. And people will argue with me on that, but you can't because the book can suck, but you can sell it if you have a great marketing plan. Robert Kiyosaki, who wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad, once said that his book, which by the way, it's so funny because it has like grammatical and spelling errors in it. And a woman was interviewing him one time and was sort of upset at the fact that she too was a writer and much better than him, yet he's this best-selling author. And he said, well, look at my book. It doesn't say best writing author. It says best-selling author. And, Chris, I think there's a statistic out of the small percentage of people who actually buy books, I think, is it 10% that will actually read it? Larry Wing was actually the one who gave me that percent. It's something like 10% will read it. So not that you don't want to produce great work, your marketing plan is so much more important, or you will never share your work with anybody. So it was very important for me to work on the marketing plan and just come up with creative ideas of this is going to work, that's not. Let's do this, let's not do this, and then create a timeline for it so I didn't feel overwhelmed. There is nothing worse than trying to come up with a marketing plan for something and coming up with it right when you're ready to market it. You will never come up with a plan because you'll be so anxious and overwhelmed of like, shoot, what do I do now? But when you come up with it when there's no pressure, you have so many better ideas and easy to execute ideas. So honestly, it's been easy for me, one step at a time, just putting things in place.
Now, can you share maybe 3 pieces of marketing and PR advice that, our audience could use and be able to hit the ground running with if they want to produce their own works and get them out there?
Yes, I absolutely will. So some people will tell you social media, no, do traditional PR, no, do that. Listen, here's what you need to do. Number 1, figure out a great grassroots market strategy, not grassroots. Grassroots simply means how can you get people to talk about your book? Who is this book for? You should have already known that before you wrote the book. Who did you write the book for? Is it adults this age to this age who are looking into this information? You should know who your audience is, whether you're producing a book or a product or a service, whatever it is. It's the first rule of marketing. Once you know who your audience is, where are they easily reachable? So grassroots for us is infiltrating the schools. It's really a no-brainer. PTAs, schools, guidance counselors. Does that take more effort and kind of is it more of a long-term strategy? Absolutely. But once the book catches on and kids start talking about the books, then we won't have to, they take care of the work for you. How can you get your readers excited about your book and sharing your book? So social media does come into play for us there. We're going to be doing some contests through social media, some giveaways to get kids to share. We have an ambassador program that we're creating for any readers, adults, young adults, to say, hey, do you want to be part of the ambassador program? Here's how we're going to, showcase you and, kind of give some incentives to you, even just you belonging to this community, being part of this movement. And here's how you're an ambassador. You're sharing this message and this movement on social media, through your email, on your blog, in your school. So we're creating that program. So grassroots is really the most fun for me because you don't even have to come up with all the ideas. Find out who your ideal market is and start asking them these questions. Give them a book for free and say, what would it take for you to share this book with other people? So if you're marketing to adults, it's like, what would make you want to share this book with other people? What would get you excited about it? Starting a book reading club, what is it? Then the other piece is the traditional PR. Even if you don't have your own publicist, you can still write a press release and you can try to get yourself booked on some traditional media. It often helps if you know somebody who knows somebody. But, as much as I love TV appearances and I think they're really great, I think grassroots will take you much farther. So if you're going to do some traditional PR, I actually have a friend who poses as her own publicist and gets herself booked on all sorts of things. It's pretty hilarious. But you don't even have to go through the TV, radio. More people are listening to podcasts now these days. So, we've got Mr. Chris Jones here. How can you get on people's podcasts and get interviewed? How can you provide value for their audience? So you should be able to pitch yourself just as easily as you can talk about your book. It's like, hey, I've got this great, here's what the book is about. Here's how I can add value to the people in your community. Can we talk about doing an interview? And people who do podcasts and other things are looking to fill those spots. And then finally, building your platform. Oh my goodness. If there's just one thing you could remember, please, for the love of God, have an email subscriber list. Please start building email subscribers. I think it's so much more important than social media. I think social media is super important. But if you don't have an email list of subscribers, MailChimp is free up to a certain point. Go get MailChimp. Put it on your website. We have a 3-chapter download. We call it Club Humphrey. And you join Club Humphrey. It's free. Put in your first name and email. You get to read the first 3 chapters for free. And we just give you updates about contests and giveaways and my speaking tour and all that fun stuff. Start collecting email addresses, because you're not spamming them. You're like building a connection with them. You're building a relationship. And this is what we call in marketing your list. Your list will serve you until the end of time. They'll buy more copies of your book. They want to hear more from you. They'll buy your future books. So just make sure you're doing that, if nothing else.
Wow, do you have packed so much value in this time we've had together. I love it. It's been so much fun.
Oh, great. I've had fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So now we're going to come in for a landing. I'm going to pick your brain just for a little while and have some fun. Is that good with you?
Yeah, sounds great.
Awesome. All right, so which author do you most admire?
Oh, I'm not just saying this because he just passed. Wayne Dyer. Wayne Dyer's changed my life. I read his memoir finally in January, and that's when I was like, it's time. It's time to work with young adults. Like, let's do this. Dr. Wayne Dyer, most definitely.
All right. If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
I'd have to say flying.
Yeah?
Yeah. I was going to choose between being invisible, but flying. Yeah, you could go anywhere.
What's your favorite book on business, personal development, or writing?
I'm going to have to go with, oh my goodness. Oh, you know what I'll say? The best one, especially for business, and this is really personal development in business, is The Greatest Salesman in the World by Agni Andino. Strangely enough, another fable. And you can learn business tactics and strategies anywhere, but you want to learn how to be in business and be yourself in business and be who you are. The Greatest Salesman in the World is the most amazing book.
All right. If you could use just one social media platform, just one, to push your book, which one would that be?
Instagram, hands down. And this goes in the same area of focus group, talking to your audience. I asked girls, I said, if I could only be on one social media, where would you want to connect? And they all said Instagram.
Awesome. What's the best advice you've ever received with regards to writing?
I don't know that I've received that much good advice with writing that really resonated with me. I guess it's really just write what you want to write. Don't write what you think you should write. Write what you want to write and write it how you want to write it. When I first read The Alchemist, it wasn't like reading Harry Potter. It wasn't a novel. It wasn't the most well-developed writing in the world, but it was just pure and true. The way he told the story. So write the way you want to write and write how you want to, write what it is you want to write.
All right. And how can our listeners connect with you, Katie?
Oh, most definitely. You can go to my website. You can either go to elizabethhazelbook.com. That's easy to remember. And it will take you to my website, katiehumphrey.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being on today. I had a great time talking to you about books and publishing and crazy thinking and meditation.
Me too, Chris. Man, 2 peas in a pod. I love it.
I know. Thank you so much, Katie.
Yeah, thank you. Take care.
Wow, what an inspiring episode. If you weren't able to take notes, I've got you covered. Visit my website at www.chrisjonesink.com/podcast to get today's show notes, as well as access other episodes you may have missed. Be sure to subscribe and rate the podcast on iTunes. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time.